Kia ora, talofa, namaste, haere mai, and welcome to this week's episode of the Niche Cage Variety Show. We're from the Niche Cage, the niche-cage.com, home of all Aotearoa sporting yarn and kōrero. Not all of it, just the stuff we like. That's all we can do, is the stuff we like and the stuff we want to create and put out into the atmosphere. And that's what we're here to do via the Niche Cage, the niche-cage.com. Quick little warm-up kōrero here. I was meaning to ask you this last week, Nico the Wildcard, because I watched Jake Averillo just absolutely run rings around the Dragons, and I was kind of in awe. Like, Jake Averillo, really fast, fantastic running style, bit of footwork. And you're saying this is the warm-up kōrero, in our pre-match debrief or pre-brief, if that's briefing, maybe is a better word. In our pre-match briefing, you're kind of poo-pooing the Tigers and Dragons as they're all shit. First of all, Isaiah Papali'i, definitely not shit. Stafford Toa, one of my favourite centres in the NRL, second to Matthew Tomoka. He was fantastic as well. He wasn't shit. Jaden Sullivan wasn't shit. Dragons are kind of shit. But 2 weeks in a row, you have come up against the supreme mover. Last week it was Jake Averillo. This week it was Jareem Buller. Just seeing him glide from the fullback position for the Tigers really stood out to me as an avid watcher of the NRL. What's your experience against fast, smooth movers? Primarily because the Warriors don't have speed. And I've been thinking a lot about speed and runners in the NRL.
Yeah, I don't know. When it's happening against your team, it's hard to sit back and be like, "Oh man, that's so cool." The way I would if I was watching. I don't know. Averillo had a few highlights again this week, didn't he? And I remember this because we had an away trip on football for football. It was quite a long away trip, with a couple hours drive to the game, and so we're driving back afterwards. And it was around the time that the Warriors were playing. So my brother was trying to get the data going on the old Sky Go app so he could watch it in the car. But because we're driving through like country northern roads, the thing's cutting out all the time. And for some reason, the Sky Go app, which is relatively rubbish to start with, when it starts buffering, it just keeps skipping back like to the start of the broadcast or whatever. So it was jumping back to the highlights of the game before the previous night. And so you could tell that the thing was buffered. I was driving, so I wasn't seeing any of this, but you could tell that the phone was buffering because all of a sudden you'd hear the commentator go, "Averillo again." And so I've got that voice, like I can't remember who was commentating, but I've got the voice and his name kind of ingrained in my head from that. But yeah, he burnt the Dragons last week. The Dragons Tigers game was a little bit different because it was like, I'm not saying that everyone out there was shit. It's just the standard of the overall quality of the game wasn't very good, and it felt like two bad teams trying not to lose rather than either of them knowing how to win. And ultimately, the Dragons knew how to lose better. So I don't know. Anytime old mate was Buller was getting meters, it's not. I'm mostly just yelling at the defensive line to stop him somehow. Like, where's the kick chase, where's the line speed, where's all this stuff? And of course the Dragons don't have much of that because they themselves also, you mentioned the Warriors being slow. I haven't seen updated stats. I did see some stuff a couple weeks into the thing that suggested the Dragons were maybe the slowest team in the whole league, and I think that stands out pretty nice. Like, Francis Moller's been getting it was the bros getting the wing minutes the other day. He scored a couple tries, but he's slow as.
Tautomonga.
Tautomonga, that's the one. Yeah, that's kind of emblematic of the Dragons. And then right at the end of that game, Ben Hunt does something brilliant where there's a terrible pass to him. He kicks it through the line on the grubber without catching it, picks it up, and then turns around and there's no one there. So throw like a pass 10 meters backward to keep the play alive, and then they get to an overlap 4-on-1, and the dude throws a cutout ball for no reason and ruins it. So I think it was a Monet. So there's the speed thing. I don't know if this lines up with what you're asking about, but I see it very, 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 very clearly in watching a terrible team every week. The Dragons are so slow. and it's so annoying. And the Warriors are a bit better than that. Warriors have many strengths that help them overcome that. The Dragons don't, so it's completely exposed. But yeah, I think having pace and dynamic movers in the modern NRL is pretty important. Also, a good coach helps. The Dragons don't have one of those either.
Warriors do have a good coach, and we will touch on that later in the show. Deep in the mangroves, I'm going into the Aotearoa Warriors mangroves. First and foremost, though, big up the Patreon whānau for supporting the Niche Case directly via Patreon, patreon.com/our Niche Case, ER Niche Case. We recorded a fabulous podcast for the Patreon podcast prior to this variety show. We talked about some Warriors stats, comparing them to the Panthers. We talked about the Blackcaps after their ODI series against Pakistan. We talked about the Wellington Phoenix struggling to a 0-2, 0-2, 0-2, 2-0 loss to
2-0.
Adelaide. Basically, Craig Goodwin 2, Wellington Phoenix 0. So lots of weekend sporting debrief done on our Patreon podcast. Big up the Patreon whānau. We do appreciate your support, and we do deliver an extra podcast there every week as well. Yesterday, also meant another monster newsletter dispatch via Substack, the nichecase.substack.com. Those are sent out every Monday and Friday evening. Again, a lot of this Warriors kōrero, a lot of these Warriors ideas, they start with the email newsletter on a Monday morning for me, and then they're sent out Monday evening, but that's where I process everything to do with the Warriors. Wildcard's got his domestic football. We didn't actually do our domestic football nugget. You were just going to say there's a lot of like late goals being scored, which is cool. Don't think it necessarily needs to be put up in lights here on the variety show, but you are writing about domestic football most Mondays in the email newsletter as well. And then Friday, we're touching on anything else. And it's a mandatory sign up for the Niche Case audience. You're getting all the podcast links. You're getting all the links to the big yarns we do on our website. They're part of the email newsletter. And we're offering extra paragraphs about Kiwi sport. Sometimes we do divert away, but we always focus on Aotearoa sport first and foremost. So sign up, thenichecase.substack.com. Enjoy that. Enjoy yourself. Check in with the Niche Case. We're out here doing our best. And that includes deploying gratitude. Because it is the theme of the week, I do want to not hijack, but I do want to just offer something. It's really easy to complain. Like, complaining is the easiest thing to do. You're not smart by complaining. You're doing the laziest thing. You're doing the easiest thing. The Niche Case, we deploy gratitude. And if you're deploying gratitude, you're not complaining. So if you see a certain Warriors storyline revolving around complaining, challenge yourself to be grateful and do better. That's my mindfulness. What's your mindfulness? Mindfulness, wildcard.
Yeah, a little bit less topical. But I've got a quote from an old German poet called Friedrich Hölderlin, who said, "In life, learn art. In artwork, learn life. If you see one correctly, you see the other also." There might be some way to tie those two ideas in together, but I'm not sure.
No. I want you to repeat it, because I just like it when it's there and we don't have to like debrief it. This is the theme of our podcast, is the pre-brief, the debrief. I just like, that was a really hard-hitting dose of mindfulness. Short, concise, crystallized. Deliver it again, please.
In life, learn art. In artwork, learn life. If you see the one correctly, you see the other also.
Glorious. I love it. Let's crack into some more Aotearoa sport. We'll let you go first in your leading banger, the most important Kiwi sporting thing from the Niche Case beat from the weekend. What do you got?
Well, the Wellington Phoenix lost. They got Craig Goodwin by Adelaide, and that's the end of their season. It's another year without an elimination finals win, without an elimination finals goal. Did well to make the finals, but they are now out. A few players have played their last game for the club, and the coach has I was going to say played. The coach has guided the team for the final time. If Vitale is done, he's moving onwards to fresh pastures, and Giancarlo Cifi Italiano is taken over. I've got 10 questions right here that I'm just going to roll through nice and quickly that I was thinking of writing about the recap of that game. 10 things that 10 questions that Chiefy's going to need to answer next season in order to get a tune out of this Wellington Phoenix team. First one, who's going to be the next starting goalkeeper? Ollie Sale's leaving. Alex Paulson's quite young, but he was the backup this season. Sale played every single minute. Paulson didn't actually feature. Is Paulson ready to play? Do they sign someone else? We will see. Number 2, David Ball, Scott Wooden. Do they still have the legs? Couple English imports. Not performing quite on the level you want your imports to do this season, but both under contract for another year coming up. Good personalities to have around, but do they have the performances in them still? Both have been a little bit injury prone. I'm a little bit skeptical about that, and it's something I'm quite worried about. Number 3, can the wonky finishing be corrected? We know they're a bad finishing team. They're a bad finishing team all season. Can they, I don't know, get themselves in better positions to be able to finish better? Or is it just a matter of these players can't do it, you need better players? Or is it a matter of put those players in different situations? I don't know. Can they figure out a way to convert their chances better? Number 4, what the hell happened to Bozidar Kraev over the second half of the season? Because at the start, he was getting goals and assists all over the show. Second half of the season, not so much. Played off the bench in the elimination final. That's kind of not ideal, especially when you've already mentioned that two of your other imports aren't exactly at full capacity. Number 5, does the squad lack leadership? It's one of the things where it's like, it sounds a bit like an NBA on ESPN kind of, the Grizzlies need more veterans, but maybe the Phoenix actually do, because I don't know, there was quite a few times during the season where it felt like the mental fragility there, just a little bit more of, I don't know, resilience. Get a few more leaders to help bring that out of them. I don't know. They do have some young players in key positions, so that's an aspect. Number 6, what do you do with the one spare import spot? For you, 5 imports this season, 4 of them are under contract. We assume they'll all come back. That's not necessarily true. They could, get the old mutual release at any point going, but as it is, Jan Stas is the only one that's leaving. However, they're also losing a couple starting level midfielders in Ugarkovic and Lewis. Do you use that import spot on a midfielder? Because if you do, then you suddenly have one fewer attacking option because you don't have someone on Jan Stas's right wing. That's a balance they're going to have to figure out. 7, are there academy players ready to step up and fill out that missing depth? Well, we should get a good idea about that at the Under-20 World Cup coming up, where there's 7 or 8, 8 or 9 players, I think, from the Wellington Phoenix Academy involved in that. Obviously, Ben Wayne leaving took a big chunk of their depth out. Do they have guys who can fill that gap? Number 8, nice and simple one. How do you get the best out of the Bro Costa Barbarouses? Because I don't think we saw that this season. Number 9, can they retain Callan Elliott? Not his best game in against Adelaide. Probably the hardest matchup you could ask for as a right back, though, is going up against Craig Goodwin, and he got torched. Mistake leading to the first goal, penalty leading to the second one. But breakout season from Callan Elliott, he's off contract. Probably the number 1 guy, if they were looking at who's left, whose futures haven't been sorted. He's probably the guy that's the most like the number 1 target for them. Can they retain him? And number 10, can Chiefy himself own his new role? Ufotele thinks he can, but it is worth mentioning he's an assistant stepping up into the full-time gig. He hasn't coached at this level before. He didn't have a professional playing career. It's something he'll have to prove himself to the rest of the league as much as anything else. With his recruitment, with his team, whatever they got to do, he's got to prove his own status with the thing. And there's my 10 questions for the leading bangers. We'll find these answers next season.
It seems like you literally asked everything.
Hopefully, because once everything's answered, everything's covered, right?
Righto. My leading banger, couple of Kiwi-NRL debuts. It was a really fun weekend of NRL footy, specifically Kiwi-NRL footy, specifically Kiwi-NRL debutant footy. We had Valynce Tafare and Keano Kini making their debuts for the Redcliffe Dolphins and Gold Coast Titans, respectively. And this is, I find it fascinating for a variety of reasons. Valynce Tafare, he scored a couple tries. Dolphins were playing at Suncorp. Dolphins own Suncorp, as everyone knows. And that was a big deal. Like, it was really fun. It was vibrant. Tafare's a character. We got to change the Val Meninga thing to Valynce the House Tafare, because he literally moves like a moving house. Like, that's how he plays footy. And it's been brewing. Like, he was playing centre for the Dolphins since leaving Aotearoa, playing rugby union. I think he was last playing for King Country through Waikato. Also traced some stuff back to he was doing Papatoe Athletics. I think he did spend time at Tangaroa College as well, which throws up an interesting wrinkle with Connolly Lemuelu, who is he played first 15 rugby for Tangaroa College, now with the Dolphins. The thing I kept seeing in the headline cycle was Valynce Tafare from Waikato Rugby Union. Peter O'Sullivan recruits New Zealand rugby player. And this is mainly from the New Zealand side. Even the Australian side, though, most of the Redcliffe Dolphin juniors from Aotearoa are from first 15 rugby. Most notably, again, forgive me pronunciation, John Fini Anganofo. He was recruited straight from Auckland Grammar first 15. He was the starting half in Redcliffe Under-18s Championship. But if you're getting a buzz about rugby union players at the Dolphins, most of their Kiwi-NRL juniors did play first 15 rugby, and half of their team that defeated the Sharks is from Aotearoa. So, you know, they are the Aotearoa Dolphins after all. And that was also interesting because I actually found the Keano Kini debut more fascinating. Valynce Tafare was playing centre last year in Queensland Cup. He just literally did what he did in Queensland Cup in the NRL. Keano Kini, as we know, he was announced one of the best schoolboy juniors in Queensland last year with Carlo Lawapu. Both of them are from Aotearoa. So he left. He was a Northcote junior. He went to Rosmini College. He left Aotearoa, entered the Titans system, and he was a superstar at Palm Beach Currumbin. He was a fullback. Straight out of high school, he is starting fullback for Burleigh Bears in Queensland Cup. He's dominating from fullback. He only played 13 minutes in his NRL debut, but he played 13 minutes at dummy half. And he's not a big bloke. He's a small, fast, naturally gifted footy player. And he played dummy half in his NRL debut, made a bunch of tackles, and he was selected. Yes, fair play. It was kind of to cover Kieran Foran. And Justin Holbrook, Titans coach, they love having like really fast utilities. They did it with Jaden Campbell for a long time. Keano Kini was like kind of there to cover Kieran Foran. But ultimately, he made his debut and played dummy half. He was selected on the bench ahead of a dummy half. Cruz Leeming had been coming off the bench to play dummy half. Keano Kini was selected ahead of him. And he's a fullback to play dummy half, which is ridiculous. And he impacted a try. I think it might have been the winning try to clinch the game. Got the ball, ran the ball really fast, good instincts, gets contact, straight away offloads to shift the footy out to Brian Kelly. And he's had 2 offloads in 3 consecutive games of Queensland Cup, along with like 180 meters per game, blah, blah, blah. But he's a small bloke. He moves fast. He knows where to get in between defenders. But he also, that NRL debut showed me 2 things. He can hold his own defensively, playing out of position at dummy half, where you defend in the middle. And also, straight after getting contact, he's looking for an offload, which is fantastic for the instincts. Shout out to both of them. Keano Kini, Valynce Tafare. We know the Kiwi-NRL takeover is pure ahi. Let's get statistical. What do you got?
Yeah, I believe we both got some Blackcap stuff coming up, because after that Pakistan series, sort of feels like that was the last one before the ODI World Cup becomes like the preparation for that becomes the absolute focus. And they were able to work through a few fringe options in that one. That was nice. But next up comes the comes the preparation for the big tournament. And so I just wanted to look at like what they've done in the cycle, this World Cup cycle since the 2019 World Cup. So they've only played 36 ODIs in that span. There was obviously a little bit of a pandemic, which affected some of that. From those 36 games, 21 wins, 13 losses, 2 no results. 21-13 is pretty good. Like that's a pretty that's a pretty high win to loss ratio. Even better when you consider that a number of those losses were actually in kind of dead rubber series, like this Pakistan series. They just lost 4 games in that one, right? So the 13 losses account for 4 games against Australia, one directly before the pandemic in the series that got postponed, and then 3 more when they went back and played the rest of that series. They lost 3 times away to India not that long ago. They lost the first game to the West Indies and then won the next 2 to win the series. Lost the first game to Pakistan, then won the next 2 to win the series, and then obviously lost 4-1 to Pakistan in this series. What do all those losses have in common? They were all away. The Black Caps, since the last World Cup, are 12-0 in Aotearoa at playing ODI cricket. Few rained off games in there as well, but 12-0 in the games that actually start and finish. That's pretty magnificent. They've used 33 players in those 36 games. Obviously, we know they've been working out, that's like 3 full 11s, right? We know they've been working out a few different options. One player has played in 35 of those 36 games, though. That player is Tom Latham. There's a drop-off of 10 more games before you get to Daryl Mitchell, who's played 25 out of 36, the next most, and then it's Mitchell Santner, 24, Henry Nicholls, 21, and then you got Michael Bracewell and Martin Guptill with 19 each, 2 guys with like contrasting trajectories, I think, in the ODI team there. You have, in terms of batters who are averaging over 40 during this World Cup cycle, Will Young, Cole McConkey, Kane Williamson, Devon Conway. Kane Williamson, no hundreds in that span, though. Devon Conway, Tom Latham, Daryl Mitchell, Michael Bracewell as well. 21 of those 33 players have bowled at some point. Of players who have bowled, taken at least 10 wickets in this World Cup cycle with an average under 30. There are 6 of them. Matt Henry, Tim Southey, Trent Boult, Henry Shipley, Kyle Jamieson, and the dark horse Daryl Mitchell. I think he's got exactly 10 wickets and at a nice tidy average in the 20-somethings. 3 bowling averages that I thought were quite interesting to finish on, though. Mitchell Santner at a slightly disturbing 45.81, although with the 3rd best RPO. And we know that's Santner's thing. Not necessarily the wickets, but he doesn't concede runs. So I think that's all right. Lockie Ferguson, since the last World Cup, going at 51s is not quite so encouraging, nor is Jimmy Neesham, who, by the way, Jimmy Neesham is one of 2 bowlers to have taken a 5 for the Black Caps in this World Cup cycle. The other one is Henry Shipley, Jimmy Neesham is the other. Despite that, Jimmy Neesham's bowling average since the 2019 World Cup is 58.5, which is rather awful considering his whole thing is like, yes, I go for big runs, but I also take wickets. Well, you don't if you get averaging 58. So,
what's the strike rate?
Let me check if I've still got.
We do know
up.
Jimmy Neesham is the man to a strike rate. I don't care about Jimmy Neesham's averages. Jimmy Neesham is one of those players you should not worry about his average. You always worry about his batting strike rate, bowling strike rate. If you've got it here, we can touch on it. Otherwise,
I do. It is his bowling strike rate is 58.9.
That's not good either.
Span. That's awful. In fact, by the way, Daryl Mitchell's 20.7. It is the 3rd worst of all of the 33 bowlers who have bowled. The 2 worst are Lister and McConkey. And they've played 4 games between themselves.
My stat is Will Young. He averaged 48 in this series. And what Will Young does is he bats well in 50 over cricket because he's got a List A average of 42.59 and he's got an ODI average of 49.33. So if Will Young's averaging over 40, that's pretty good. And I think he is a solid replacement for Kane Williamson. Let's go deep into the mangroves. What do you got deep in your mangroves?
Deep in my mangroves, I have 5 undercover flying Kiwis who don't necessarily get the hype because they're not necessarily at a time where their flying Kiwis columns have been absolutely stacked with players doing good things, especially scoring goals at the moment is such a trend. Got to highlight a few of the sort of deeper cut options. One of them is Zach Jones, playing for Haverfordwest County in Wales. top flight in Wales, but for a bit of a like sort of underdog battlery team. They weren't very good for most of the season. Jones is an ex-Wellington Phoenix Academy goalkeeper, by the way. Weren't very good for most of the season. Then they did the old split where they go into the relegation round. So they were in the bottom half of the table. And suddenly they were really good and he was keeping clean sheets and they ended up coming first in the relegation rounds, which put them into playoffs to try get into Europa Conference League qualifiers. So they're playing off against a couple other Welsh teams. They had their semi-final on the weekend. They drew 0-0 against Cardiff Met. They conceded a penalty with 20 minutes to go. Zach Jones saved it. They went to extra time. Zach Jones made a brilliant one-on-one save. They go to a penalty shootout. Zach Jones saves the first 2 penalties of the shootout and they go through to the final. Heroic stuff. Expect to read plenty of that in Flying Kiwis this week. Corbin Piper playing for Wexford. Corbin Piper is a Birkenhead fellow who played National League last year and then moved over to a second-tier Irish team. So while everyone's talking about Max Mutter and Nando Peinecker for good reason, Corbin Piper, division below, already worked his way into being a starting midfielder for Wexford, and he was actually in the team of the week for last week. So big yarns from him. Going to mention Daisy Cleverly, who is a regular, unlike most of these other ones, is a regular international for the football ferns, but probably not first 11, but regular in the squads. However, I don't think people are quite comprehending. She's playing for one of the best teams in Denmark, HB Køge. And they're right up there in a title race. She started their last couple of games. She's usually a little bit in and out of things, but she's started their last couple of games. They are currently just ahead, holding off, I think it's Bromby, trying to win a three-peat. She turned up midway through last season, was part of their second title in a row, their second ever title. They'd never won before, then won a second one, trying to win a third one. They're leading the way there. Number 4, Dalton Wilkins. Used to be one of the Helsingør fellas with Eli Just and Callum McCowart. He moved away for more first-team football to Kolding, a division below. So third tier in Denmark, but he's playing every game for them at left back. Always fullback sort of depth option. They're pushing for promotion. That's another one to keep an eye on. And then finally, the boy Matt Dibley-Diaz. We mentioned him on, I think it was a Patreon podcast day a few weeks back, about how he was a potential bolter for the under-20s World Cup squad. He's born in Wellington, raised there for the first few years of his life. His mother is a Wellingtonian, his dad's Brazilian heritage. Moved over to England at some point and is working his way up the Fulham Academy. This morning, Matt Dibley-Diaz was on the bench for the Fulham Premier League team. He didn't play. He was an unused sub wearing number 49, but he was called up to the bench for the first time. Didn't make the under-20 World Cup squad, though. That didn't happen. He's eligible for about 4 different countries, so it's a bit of a convincing act. But I think when you've got the opportunity to maybe sit on the bench and potentially get a Premier League debut versus going to play under-20 World Cup, you probably take the Premier League debut, so I can understand that line of thinking. And hopefully we can get him committed for the Olympics next year. That's a possibility. But got to shout out Mr. Matt Dibley-Diaz. What have you found yourself in the mangroves there?
We're going quality over quantity here as far as deep in the mangroves go. Gonna drop some concentrated Raro juice from the Warriors. Loss against the Panthers, and this finishes a 3-game streak of losses against the Storm, Roosters, Panthers. All are really good teams. Really tough patch of Warriors footy. And speaking to you right now, it would be terrible of me to complain about the refs, given what I said about deploying gratitude earlier in the podcast. But also, there's no insights there. There's no insights. I can't just say the Warriors lost because of the refs in the podcast.
Yeah, it's a dead end.
It's got to offer something better than that. And what I'm going to offer you is that Wade Egan finished defending in the centres against the Panthers, and that's really tough to win a game against the Panthers when Wade Egan, bless him, is defending at the centres. Warriors actually finished with Maratini Akore and Wade Egan as their centres. Really tough to win games of NRL footy against Penrith Panthers doing that. And also, there's a lot of stuff in the Warriors that is setting themselves up for future success. A lot of foundations in adversity. And if you're establishing habits under adversity, if you're building experience through adversity, I believe that will set you in good stead moving forward. During Jackson Ford's sin bin, Tom Ale and Dimitri Sifikula were the middle forwards alongside Tohu Harris. The two youngest forwards were playing with Tohu Harris while the Warriors had a player in the sin bin. That is great experience for them. Later in the game, Tom Ale has to move to right edge to cover Marata Niukore because Dallin Watene-Zelezniak has left the field. And Sifikula replaces Jackson Ford on the left edge after his sin bin. Then Sifikula has a bit of niggle. He'll learn from that as well. That's another learning experience with his altercation with Nathan Cleary. But that was because he was on left edge. So you literally had the Warriors' youngest forwards in a period of the sin bin playing in the middle. After the sin bin, they are the edge forwards. Tom Ale on the right, Dimitri Sifikula on the left. And I think that is going to be very useful giving them that type of experience, which you can't design. You can't design, let's put our youngest forwards under fatigue, under adversity against the best team. You can't design that. That just happens. You can't, and this is another thing, like the Warriors recruits, Marata Niukore, Jackson Ford, those type of lads, Dylan Walker, Luke Metcalf, Tamaira Martin, they can all play a bunch of positions. Now we've seen the two youngest forwards play both forward positions, middle and edge. That's going to be useful. A couple of other bits of useful information with regards to the Warriors. They are first in set completion, and that is the thread of mana throughout all of their games, especially the losses. They show up, they compete. Penrith Panthers are second, but then you go missed tackles, the Warriors are 7th, and the Penrith Panthers are 17th. So there's the difference between the Warriors and the Panthers. They both complete well. Panthers are a better tackling team. And I think we're talking about this in the Patreon podcast, like a lot of that Kai Kara France wrestling, maybe that is leading the Warriors to be third in penalties conceded. Maybe it's an unconscious bias. The Panthers are 14th. I still think that the Warriors are doing a lot of stuff that can be penalized. Hence, they are third for penalties conceded. But those can all be ironed out with more footy and getting your better players back. Nickel Krokstad, Tamaira Martin, Niukore, Tohu Harris, Jazz Tavanga. Who else has been injured? Everyone's been injured for the Warriors. Who do we complain about the injuries to? Is there an investigation there? I don't know. But it doesn't make life easy when you're playing the best teams. However, the Warriors are competing. And that's a good sign. And there's a foundations of experience being gained in this period. Question time. You have to get through this quickly. I know you've got your 10 questions and you've got plenty of Phoenix stuff here, but I want the most positive Phoenix thing after the end of their season.
We've already asked all those questions, so that's done. Most positive thing is, I think that despite the fact that a few players are leaving, there's a new coach coming in. I think despite all that, there's still a lot of continuity. There's a team that's made the finals in 4 out of 5 years. I think they got 12 players under contract for next season, which is kind of around. You'd ordinarily want a couple more, but I think for this thing, it's quite a good balance because it gives a new coach the opportunity to put his stamp on the squad as well. 6 of the starters from the game against Adelaide, plus a couple more who came off the bench, are included in those things. So there's a good core of their team coming back. New coaches, the assistants stepping up, continuity there. There isn't a feeling that the team are going to have to go through a rebuild now that Talai's left. Like, I feel they might not be quite as good, but it does feel like there's continuity. So I think that's definitely a big positive because we've seen the opposite before from many teams. Question back the other way. We both laid out some Blackcap stats before. You in particular focused on Will Young. I'm asking you, what's your Blackcaps top 6 for the ODI World Cup?
Finn Allen, Devin Conway, Daryl Mitchell, Will Young, Tom Latham, Glenn Phillips. 6 best batters from Aotearoa, excluding Kane Williamson. Fantastic representation of Kiwi cricket on the batting side of things. Let's get a bit of musical funk into the atmosphere once again. I made a discovery, Matahara. She is a lady from Jakarta. And just some some very mellow, kind of indie, chill music that is absolutely fantastic for a rainy day in Aotearoa. So if you're into a bit of melancholy guitar music, give old Matahara a check out yourself.
Well, that's your rainy day soundtrack. I think the new Tiny Ruins album, which is called Ceremony, feels a little bit more of like the summer equivalent. Like it's very sort of gentle, folksy, summer breezy kind of thing. Beautiful music. Like the band is in top form. Songs are great. Tiny Ruins have been one of them Kiwi artists who have been like that group has been laying down some good work for quite a while. So nothing has changed on that. That was featured in our album Jukebox last month for April. Songs by Tom Verburn and Bryony Matthews as well. They were in the most recent playlist. A couple more Kiwi tunes, and then also from the international realms, new album coming out soon from the group Oxbow. And Oxbow's been around for like 30 years. They've been doing great music for a long time. Like the sounds of this new one. Haven't done an album since 2017, which is a record called Thin Black Duke, which is, I think, the best thing they ever did. Very hard to describe them other than saying like avant-garde. Like there's elements of like doom metal, but they're not a metal band. They're as much classical as metal, and they're definitely got some like post-punky things going on. I very hard to describe. They're one of those bands that's like they're their own genre. No one else sounds like Oxbow. So therefore, very excited to see what they're going to serve up with the new record. And there we go.
Big up yourself, love yourself, stay beautiful. Kia kaha, raise your mana, even though, you know, a bit of rain, bit of winter vibes coming in, you can still raise your mana any which way. How?
Like a challenge.
It's not a challenge, it's just, well, maybe it's a bit of that Warriors thing. Like if you can raise your mana under adversity,
yeah,
it's going to be far more useful. If you can gain experience against the best teams, put yourself in really tough positions, you'll reap the rewards. So hopefully you raise your mana and you get a bit of abundance, but a bit of bliss in your winter days. Big up, kia ora.